Not quite yet. We may go live. It's always a little bit of lag as we're figuring out this software. All right. We are now officially live, I believe.
As soon as we go live, Corey walks off.
Well, you know,
Corey, where'd you go?
I'm back.
Good to have you here. Um, let's check this. Hello, everyone. We are just figuring out. All right, we now are officially live. As production guy, Kevin here, I will be in the background helping with moderating, but I will pass it off to Will, Corey, and Scott to lead it with our wonderful guests, Rebecca Harned and Tom Jenkins. So Corey and Scott will take it from here.
Perfect. Want to welcome everybody to another edition of Tech Talk Tuesday. And today it is all things NERIS. So we're extremely excited about today's guest. And so we're going to get them to introduce themselves. So Rebecca, if you don't mind leading us off, and we'll kind of go around. After Rebecca, we'll do Tom Jenkins, and we'll go around the gamut.
Great. Yeah. Thank you all for having me. So Rebecca Harned, I'm an advisor with the U.S. Fire Administration, specifically focused on data and technology and the development of the new National Emergency Response Information System known as NERIS. I've been in this field and industry for over 20 years, really working at that intersection of data, science, technology, and policy, specifically for fire service, emergency management, and public safety. And really excited about our topic today, of course, and just happy to be joined with you all. Thanks.
Thank you. Tom?
Hi, I'm Tom Jenkins. I'm a senior advisor to the NERIS project working here at FSRI, really representing the fire service. I'm a 26-year career firefighter and fire chief. And, when you have a project like this, one of the most important things we continue to do is to focus and listen to our stakeholders, the firefighters, that there's a cultural element to the project. So excited to visit with all of you today and to be here with Rebecca.
Perfect. What about Corey? Introduce yourself, Corey.
Hi, yeah. So Corey Claiborne, I'm a fire marshal outside of Dallas. Actually, I'm here to enjoy the ride a little bit and maybe contribute where I can and see where this takes us with the NERIS adventure.
And Scott?
Hold on. Let me get this. Did I get it in there?
You got it.
You got it
Yeah,
in there perfectly.
Tom, Reed, and Rebecca may not know, but we're not against shameless plugs to try to get free swag. So today we're going to try Monster. It hasn't worked yet, but we're going to keep trying until it hits on something. So enjoy a Monster drink. Scott Roseberry, Battalion Chief of Garland Fire Department. I too am in the Dallas area with Corey. We're having some fun this morning. We've had quite a few storms blow through. I just came in hot from a structure fire. Hopefully I don't have to go to another one while we're here for this hour. But if I have to leave, I apologize for that. But I'm excited to be here. I'm excited for today. Corey and I have actually had the pleasure of working with Rebecca when she was with the International Association of Fire Chiefs, and she was instrumental in helping us get TSI, Technology Summit International, off the ground and to the major success it is today. So I really appreciate that, Rebecca, and I'm glad to have you here today.
Perfect. Perfect. And I'm Will Brocious, Deputy Chief of Charlottesville Fire Department. Also work part-time for Tom as a NERIS advisor. We got a great team. Very excited again about today's episode. As Scott mentioned, we do keep talking about sponsors, so we just bring this one forward. I'm a fan of Coca-Cola, so if they're out there listening, we keep on trying. Fiji Water has not returned our phone call yet, but won't take it too personal. But I do have a confession. I know over the last two episodes, there was a couple NERIS questions, and I think most would agree our spouses are like our biggest critics, right? And my wife says, you didn't answer those questions very well when they asked you about NERIS. Well, she's like, you kind of should know this stuff. And I was like, well, no, they're coming on the show. I didn't want to jump out in front of them. So today we will get everything answered, or mostly everything answered, right? That's the goal. So we're going to start off with Tom. So what is NERIS? Let's start there. What is it?
Well, the most common answer you would get, right, if you ask a firefighter who's been paying like a little bit of attention, you're going to have people tell you that it's a replacement for NFIRS, the legacy information system related to incident response. That's not wrong, right? It's a replacement for NFIRS. That's accurate. But what we have to make sure the fire service is aware is that this is really developing an ecosystem that's not just about being a filing cabinet. That's what we have today, right? It's a place to put some data. but it's a modernization of that system that's going to aid both in the timeliness of the incident data that we have and the accuracy of it. And I think that what you find is it's with that modernization of the system, the ability to connect it to other definitive data sets, that we're gonna make a significant improvement in the ability of decision makers in departments to answer questions and to deploy resources. And so, NERIS is something that I think that while we're working hard to deploy it and onboard, what you can expect to see in the decade to come and the decades that follow that is it becomes a common denominator in a lot of good things that we're doing, not just to keep our community safe, but also our firefighters.
Yeah, great answer. And I think the important thing people should probably realize at the stage we're at right now, for the last probably year and a half, when you think of NERIS, it's Tom Jenkins, right? That's the picture we see. But can you go into the team that you've been able to put together? Give a little shout out to the group that's been doing a lot of work behind the scenes.
Yeah, I think it's even bigger than that, Will. I mean, you have people like, I'd probably highlight too. I'm going to embarrass Rebecca. She's not much of a stoic, but you've got Rebecca, who has by far been an unsung hero of navigating, deploying NERIS, making it a reality. She can talk more about that if she wishes, but also Craig Weinschenk is the principal investigator on the project, one of the smartest brains in the fire service, who oddly enough has never been a firefighter, right? Never put on a firefighter's costume, but cares deeply and understands how we have to all work together and take our perspectives and information to make a system that is hyper focused on the firefighter, right? And ensuring that they can take care of those communities, big and small. Beyond that, we work with a small group of contractors, right? That we want to make sure that we're relevant to the fire service, and that's a good way for us to, gain traction. We also have throughout this entire process held hands with important partners, fire service agencies that were part of our prototype and our beta deployment back in March and August, respectively, of last year. And then I would even point to our technology vendors, that you look at the records management system companies, and those folks have provided essential feedback. And then, last but not least, Will, the stewards of a lot of the data that exists today in the legacy system of the states. And the state fire marshals have been important partners with this. And they've been some of the most vocal because they have different perspectives. And I think that I can probably speak for Rebecca a little bit. You learn a lot when we have good, healthy discussions about, the different risk characteristics and response considerations at these various states. And so what I hope you're hearing me say is that it's a big team, and there are a lot of people who have contributed to just the initial development and deployment of NERIS. But this is still just the starting point, right? That our real obligation is to make sure that we continue to rinse and repeat in improving things.
That again, it goes back to team, and I think that's the important thing to highlight in the fire service. No matter what we do, Scott was just telling us a little bit ago. He just left a fire scene. Corey's in fire prevention. No matter where you are in the fire service, it ultimately comes down to having a good team around you. And that's how we are successful. So, Rebecca, could you tell us a little bit about your team? I know there's some challenges going on the national level with the federal government stuff, but how's the team holding up?
Yeah, great. Thank you so much. And I just want to echo, Tom's response to this. This has been really, truly a whole of fire service team endeavor, right? Like, I don't think any one person can take the credit, but certainly I would say there's a very special dev team at Fire Safety Research Institute, FSRI, that really is unparalleled to any other team that I've ever seen. And I think a lot of the success and the extremely aggressive timeline that we've had to develop and launch against is due in large part to the team that was assembled specifically for NERIS. So that's on that side of it. Really, this has been, it's certainly been a USFA endeavor, but we really focused on collaboration with our federal interagency partners to develop NERIS and ensure its interoperability and compatibility with other systems and other data coming from U.S. Forest Service, Department of Interior, National Highway and Transportation Safety Administration, and other federal agencies. And I also want to call out to DHS, that's Department of Homeland Security, Science and Technology, Directorate, who really has been a key partner with USFA, FEMA, and FSRI throughout the development of NERIS from the very beginning. And really, those partnerships have been instrumental, and they're part of what is going to ensure NERIS is resilient to whatever changes we're facing, whether that's, local fire service changes or broader environment changes that we're facing. So I just really wanted to highlight that because it is important. But there's also been a lot of advocates inside of FEMA that have helped to make this possible. I mean, we are in a really strong place with our cybersecurity controls, with all of our internal compliance. And that's because everyone bonded together and said, we need to solve this problem for the American Fire Service. And I'm really excited to be where we're at today. And I know we're in a solid path moving forward.
This is
I have
all
a question
exciting.
for you. I have a question because you were talking about the timeline. It seems like, I mean, was it 2022 when we had the first TSI and Dr. Lori Moore Merrill was talking about? So it was December. That was the first time I heard of NERIS. And it seems like, I mean, here we are in 2025, like less than 3 years later. That seems like an incredibly fast timeline to have gotten this. Is that about accurate? About 3 years?
Yeah, so I'll answer that question, Scott. Yeah, it's actually really NERIS has been in development essentially 2 years this week.
Wow.
So I was really excited when Kevin invited us to do this because it is kind of it's the
Happy
2 year
birthday.
anniversary.
Birthday.
Yeah. Yeah, so it incredibly short timeline to, figure out how to solve the problem, get the stakeholder and national engagement that we need, and then build a solution and launch it to the American Fire Service.
Yeah, I don't think anybody realized how incredibly difficult that was for 2 years to be able to do that for, what do we have? Probably 80,000 fire departments across the United States, if I were to guess, something like that. I mean, it's just incredibly compact timeline. So congratulations to both of you and your whole team for getting that done.
Yeah, you talk about the speed of how fast it's moved. I remember the first time I kind of got on my radar was just last year, February at the Vision 2020 conference. I think I introduced Tom Jenkins, and after he came off stage, he asked me very bluntly, he's like, "What do you think of NERIS?" And not knowing much about it, I said, "Well, I'm not really thinking about it. Whatever happens, happens." And would you like to be involved? Yeah, I guess. And he hands me his card, and I look down at the name. I'm like, oh, great. I should have answered that better. And then he allowed me to be involved. But seeing from where it went, even just from that time to where we are now, is encouraging. And it really, again, it shows that we can accomplish anything in the fire service if we put our minds to it, work together as a team, and we don't let challenges hinder us. Because, to say there hasn't been challenges, there has, but the team has been able to push forward through those. But now, where we are now, 2 years in, we've got departments that are starting to onboard more and more. Tom, maybe walk us through what it looks like to onboard. So I'm chief whoever, and I'm in the state that's getting ready to turn it on, and I'm sweating bullets. What do I have coming towards me?
I think the first thing I tell any chief that's sweating bullets about NERIS is don't stress it, right? That there's change afoot, but the first thing that you have to recognize is that we're all in this together, right? That this is part of the conversation with NERIS is understanding the why, right? Doing a little cheerleading, that you kind of have to understand the problem and what this solution really is before you can appreciate the timeline and the process. But onboarding is two parts. Scott made a comment just moments ago. He said, there's probably about 80,000 fire departments, and we think there's about 30,000. And I have to say, we think, right? I suppose if there's any two, definitive sources on that number, Rebecca and I should be able to answer. Unfortunately, we are unable to answer. Nobody is really, because every day there's a consolidation, a merger, a new department potentially. And so one of the things that NERIS will do is it will become almost the census of the U.S. Fire Service, helping us to understand not just the various departments out there and the way we might categorize them and classify them, but the resources and capabilities and services that they provide to local communities, which can be very useful as departments want to compare themselves to other like neighbors, to look at, deployment options, solutions, evolving technologies even. And so onboarding is first to just get information about departments in there, in the department node, the entity node within NERIS. And that's a pretty comprehensive thing to do, right? We're looking at stations and resources and minimum staffing and some not incredibly complex things, but just a little bit of time invested there. That onboarding process is about an hour or so, even for departments that have stations in the dozen, which is, a fraction of the U.S. Fire Service. The second and more complicated part of onboarding has to do with the transition with how you're reporting your incidents. Right now, the way that all departments pretty much submit incident data is in a very clunky manner. Gathering that at the local level, shifting it to the state somehow through a file upload, even an email, and then eventually makes its way to the National Fire Data Center. The incident submission process for NERIS is really two ways. One, you're either going to use our free incident data collection app that is available within the NERIS platform. That's actually the easiest way to do it, and that will be a huge benefit to a lot of the smaller agencies, I would assume, across the country. The other way is by API, right? That conduit from a records management system into NERIS, making the data available that is inputted at the local level in near real time, available to be consumed at the national level and at the state level to those stakeholders that need to know it. The transition for incident data really can come anytime in 2025. So when we say onboarding, we just started onboarding with FEMA Region 2, which primarily is New York and New Jersey in terms of population. And that process means we're ushering in and welcoming in departments within that FEMA region, helping them to onboard, helping them to set up their profile, fix, common issues that come with a information technology solution, resetting passwords, missing an email here and there because of a slow email domain carrier. And then those departments may wait months or even towards the end of the year to transition their incident data. So when we think of onboarding, it's important that we think of it as kind of a 1-2 punch. That it is that department entity information being submitted in the profile, and then transitioning your incident information when your department is ready, and your local records management system, if that's what you're using, when they're ready as well.
Great. Now, how many of us that are watching remembers, and some of us still have to do it, the legacy system? We need data, and we call our rep, and it may go all the way up to the national center before you get an answer, and it's this big convoluted thing. Rebecca, walk us through that process for NERIS. We need our data. How do we get it?
So I am really excited to share with you something that we are launching later this month, and it's going to be called NERIS Open. So essentially, open data services and data feeds of the NERIS data. So we'll be launching later in May of this month, the NERIS Open for all of the fire department data. So that'll be the fire departments, the station locations, and then the fire department service boundary areas on a national scale at the local level. And that data is going to get better and better and better. So as more fire departments onboard onto NERIS, though that data set from NERIS Open will become more accurate and more authoritative. So as we look to where we're going to be at the end of the calendar year, we can expect to have really solid, comprehensive coverage of the most current and authoritative data. And then as we look to the fall of this year, in 2025, we'll be looking to release the first version of NERIS Open data for the incident data itself, right? And so that will be fully geospatial data services of all of the incident data from all of the departments, obviously with some elements scrubbed out, obviously, but that data will be available to all the fire departments, state fire marshal offices, and your departments can use that data to do all of the analysis that they need to do, consume it into your different systems and anything else that's needed. So our goal is to provide out as much data services as possible back to the local fire service as we move forward.
Thank you.
Very cool. And I don't know if this is probably a better one for Rebecca or Tom. We did got a first question in from Mr. Grant Walker. The question's going to be, and it's going to be from the census piece, how would you delineate between an individual company versus the overall department? So I think, kind of the question is how granular are you going to be able to get with that open reporting piece?
Well, I don't know. It sounds to me like he's asking about the fire, like what I was referring to as the fire department census piece, the setting up the profile, and we get pretty granular with it because one of the things we have to have is information about individual unit and company information in order to help departments understand effective response force. Now, I know all of you well enough to know that you come from organizations. We're talking about effective response force. That's terminology you're familiar with, right? But that's not true for the vast majority of 1.1 million firefighters don't understand that. And that's maybe one of those pretty basic problems that we can help to solve is improving some of the conversation about having a necessary assembled team of firefighters. And so within the system, it's very intuitive that as you set up a department within NERIS, you simply add stations. Within those stations, you add units. And within those units, you're able to tell us some information about the minimum staffing. If you're a small volunteer department, it may be one. If you're a large metro urban community, that might be five or six. But it's that information that allows us to provide some analytic services regarding effective response force. It's very intuitive we've got about 400 departments right now that have onboarded into the system, and that's actually a number that is dated at the end of April. It's more than that at the moment, but we have had no issues. Knock on wood, we've had no department that has said that we've had any issues, adding stations and units, and I've got a couple of very small, what I would call almost technology allergic fire chiefs that have been able to do it and do it successfully. So not a lot of concern there, but it is pretty granular to the benefit of the agency.
Thank you. And we also want to remind people, and Corey, appreciate you asking that question. We want to remind everybody that's on Facebook or LinkedIn, YouTube, drop those questions in the chat. We have some questions already, but we'd love to hear from you all. But maybe this one goes back to Rebecca, right? So we talked about small departments, whether they're volunteer, large departments, but if I'm a small department and I'm worried about if my department is compatible with NERIS. Go into the compatibility of NERIS. What do I need? I'm just five guys in a truck. Am I compatible?
So that's a great question, Will. With regards to NERIS compatibility, so we've really scaled NERIS to support the small, maybe volunteer department or very small combination department that may not even have, an electronic based records management system, right? So you don't need to have a RMS to be able to use NERIS. So we provided a NERIS data collection app that's available to no cost for those departments to submit their incident reports. They can submit them on a mobile phone, right, from inside their apparatus or inside the station, right? They don't even need to, have a large computer or anything accessible. So we've really tried to take down the barriers of entry for a small fire department to be able to report in a way that's streamlined and still modern, right? It's all web-based, but the beauty of that is, wherever they have access in an internet connection, right? That may not be coverage across their whole jurisdiction at this point, but wherever they might have that, they can go ahead and submit those incident reports very easily, and it's very flexible. So there's that. The other piece that I'm excited to share with you all is we had this vision with NERIS that we could somehow magically connect all of these disparate computer-aided dispatch or CAD systems and all of these diverse records management systems or RMS that are used by the fire service locally and somehow bring that data in. So that was the vision that we had like 2 years ago. And we're like, how do we accomplish this? And so we've worked really diligently over the last, actually a year, May, to really facilitate with the CAD and RMS vendor community compatibility and interoperability. So if a local fire department already has a CAD system, or maybe they have an RMS system, Maybe they even have CAD integrated with their RMS, which is becoming more common. The beauty is with NERIS, those vendors can actually perform a very simple self-service test against NERIS to confirm their data exchange compatibility. And they actually get awarded a NERIS data exchange compatibility badge, which has been a really interesting development. And it's proven to be successful. We have 13 different CAD and RMS vendors that are already badged with that compatibility seal. And we have 3 more I know in the process right now. And it's available to them, to access for free. It's self-service. So again, we've really tried to work, to get through any of those barriers of entry for the existing CAD and RMS vendor community to participate. And then the other thing I want to share with you on this is really flexible. So any technology developer, anybody who's innovating in fire tech, right, can take a look at the NERIS data schemas and our API infrastructure, and they can build and create and innovate new solutions that probably none of us have even thought of based on that NERIS framework that will ensure interoperability and compatibility for the fire service, which to me is really exciting when we think about the future of where we can go in enabling tech for fire.
I've got a bunch of questions about that, but I think one of the more simple questions I have is, so we're in Texas, and what, as a fire chief, do I need to do to get onboarded? Am I going to get a phone call? Do I need to reach out to somebody? We do, like, especially for ones like us who have a major RMS company. What do we need to do to get onboarded?
That's a multifaceted answer. So just like connectivity, what we try to provide every way that a department, can connect to NERIS, we try to make sure that we're compatible and we can work with them. It's kind of the same way with this initial onboarding, that we recognize that the hyper local nature of departments means that we kind of have to meet them wherever they're at. In many cases, we've got contact information for departments. And so it may be as simple as you could sit idle and magically, when we are ready for that FEMA region, you receive an email from us. In New York and New Jersey, I'd say that probably represents 50 to 60% of those agencies. And in the remaining percent, we work with the state fire marshals or whoever is the local custodian of the current legacy system data. And they helped us with identifying some points of contact and reached out. I know many states right now have sent emails and had some communication with their local agencies. And so you may have departments that have submitted information and kind of provided that communication into the state, who of course is trying to help us. And so that may be what happens. And we also have circumstances where departments, we think we have contact information, and that information is a little outdated, right? There's small agencies that, they elect officers in their fire department, and those change. And so from the time we get it to the time we're ready to roll in that FEMA region, the information we have becomes stale. And those agencies, I try to kind of comb through the help desk tickets every day and just look at what the development team's having to handle. And I see 1 or 2 of those every day, that we have departments that are saying, hey, we haven't heard anything. And they reach out just like they should, and we fix their problem. And that's what, for your listeners out there who are not only, caring about how their department's going to connect, but likely have friends and other organizations, work colleagues. The answer, the long and short of it is, there's a lot of ways to connect with NERIS. When all else fails, you just reach out to us, right? That it's not hard to figure out what FEMA region you're in and what the order of onboarding is in the country right now. That information is available on our onboarding website. It's neris.fsri.org/onboarding. You can go there, figure out when that time frame is in calendar year 2025. And although it's very likely that you'll just hear from us, if you don't, reach out to us. It's not a Monday through Friday 8 to 5 operation. It is an everyday 365 operation. And so we're going to make sure that the fire service gets what they need if they have questions about onboarding.
What's been the biggest hurdle for departments that are trying to onboard so far?
that there's 27,000 of them probably.
That's a lot of information to put into a system at one time, right?
Yeah, it is. I mean, the biggest hurdle is that you have 27,000 fire departments that are all a little unique. They definitely think they're unique, and in many cases they are unique. And that when you're trying to, exercise some choreography with all of them, it's just difficult, right? When we're all done with this, every now and then I'll run into fire chiefs who have advice. They'll say, "Hey, for this onboarding thing, what you really should do, Tom," and that's great advice that would have been really useful about 24 months ago, right? But right now we're trying to do a lot of work here, and it's been, without a doubt successful. And what we will find is that, in this process, it'll be the fact that we're, communicating with folks and that sort of thing that I think, that really matters.
Kevin and I, we've joked about fire departments. They're like, once you've seen one fire department, you've seen one fire department. They're like airports. They all have the same mission, but have you ever seen two that look alike? They're all
Amen.
completely different.
Amen. No,
Yeah.
you're very right. And probably, Scott, what I would, from when we really started talking about onboarding, and I think Rebecca might correct me if I'm wrong, but I think about 18 months ago we started really coming out. It was like the second webinar I think I participated in right after I transitioned and retired. We started telling people, find your point of contact.
Mhm.
And I think an area we probably could have improved, we said, hey, make sure your point of contact is, aware, has this information, that they're, staying abreast of all the latest and greatest with NERIS. The other thing we probably should have been more deliberate in is to make sure that we made some assumptions that they would be technology familiar and aware. And that's not always the case, right? In these departments, there are plenty of people who, we live in a day and age of technology, but some of the challenges we see most frequently have nothing to do with NERIS, right? They have that they don't know what a junk mail folder is in case some of our communication goes there. It's just things that maybe people on this call take for granted. And so, that's a piece of advice, that just make sure that you have some familiarity with your email system even. Those are some of the more common hurdles.
If I could just add on to that a little bit, I think, NERIS by design is far more intuitive and easy for someone in the fire service to pick up and use than the legacy NFIRS system. And I think, obviously, I would hope so. It's been, 40 years of technology innovation. But what's important there is I think a lot have had a sentiment that like, oh, we need a lot of training to be able to use the new system. And really, we aim to develop the platform and all of the capabilities to minimize the need for training. But what I'd say is we did recently, actually last week, launched an onboarding center, which is on the NERIS webpage. And you can gain access to like what you need from an onboarding checklist. You can gain access to these short 5-minute videos on like how to do certain things on the platform. So we're trying to make it like as firefighter friendly as possible from a, how do we make this transition happen easily for a department?
I was in a class several years ago, and they were handing out everybody's NFIRS reports. And as they handed me ours, they said they were telling you if it was good or garbage. They handed me ours, said that's garbage. And I said, well, the problem is you gave me a trash truck to deliver it to you, and so what'd you expect? They didn't find it as funny as I did, but but that's really, NFIRS was such a tough system to navigate, or is for some of us still.
Yeah.
By the way, everybody watching, I think Will over here in my corner, he's one of the regional people that you can reach out to. So, shall we give him your cell phone, Will?
Yeah,
Well,
yeah, I
maybe put
know
it up
what
on the screen.
Tom
Yeah, can you
mentioned
put that on the
earlier.
screen, Kevin?
Yeah, throw it up there. Tom mentioned earlier with FEMA Region 2, and that includes the Virgin Islands and Puerto Rico. And if someone just has to have somebody come to either one of those locations to help, I'll be willing to sacrifice myself to come out there and help. So we got another question. Corey, you want to take that question that we just got
Yeah,
in?
absolutely. So, and I will say, I'd love to be able to actually answer this one, but I'm still kind of trying to get caught up on the nearest stuff myself. And so, Ed Galea, and apologize if I said the name wrong, but he basically asked a question. I'll read it word for word so we miss it, but to me, it does kind of get to the heart of what NERIS is. Is this a record keeping software that's for holding data after the fact, or is this for like a proactive leaning forward? Are we going to be able to store our stuff for disaster management, almost like a response side too? So, and I like I said, to do justice, I'm going to get his actual question in here, but will local communities be able to enter secure data into NERIS, such as the location of vulnerable people that may need assistance in the event of a large scale evacuation, wildfire? Um, this could include locations of individuals that might have access to a vehicle for evacuation. Um, so he's really talking about kind of a leaning forward method on this to get ahead of stuff. Is that kind of y'all's intent of it, or how does that play out?
Did you want to take that first, or do you want me to take that?
I would say in general, I want you to clean up my mess is what I want. That's how we operate.
That
Um,
is.
I would say in general, what it sounds like is he's looking for like more of an operational system. I may not understand the question entirely, but that's not the intent of NERIS, right? NERIS is an emergency incident information system. It does not mean that information that could be gleaned from NERIS, especially as it involves community risk reduction activities, couldn't help identify, especially more on like a neighborhood or a geospatial scale that's a little bit more useful. You could likely utilize NERIS to help you identify vulnerable populations and demographics in your community that are at risk, certainly. But if I heard it correctly, I heard the word individual. And that tells me that I think what he's looking for is something that, this would remind me of that's information that, at least in my experience, would be better suited as an alert in like the computer aided dispatch system, and other systems that are just more appropriate from an operational response. But I don't know. I may have not heard it completely correct. Rebecca, you want to take a stab at that?
Yeah, I'm happy to kind of add to what you've shared, though, Tom. So think of NERIS as a post-incident reporting system and sharing information about an incident that tells like the full story of that incident post incident, even though some of that data is coming off of CAD, right? Which really ensures that we kind of get a real time or near real time understanding of the progression of that incident. And then obviously with information added by the responding fire department and unit. And so it really is that post-incident data. But to the question, it raises a really important aspect of, in our fire departments, how do we understand our vulnerable people and vulnerable populations? Where do they live? What are their vulnerabilities? Is it that they're transportation dependent? Is it that they're oxygen dependent? And so to enable better planning, whether that's evacuation planning, could be wildfire, could be hurricane, it could be power outage concerns of those populations, right? And so with NERIS, while you aren't going to use it to quote unquote register, I have a vulnerable person at this location, this is their vulnerability. What you can do is use your data that you're putting into NERIS and we're providing back to you, right, as a data service, and ingest that into a variety of different analyses that your fire department can do on protecting your vulnerable populations. So basically, NERIS is going to provide you with that insights on incident trends that may help to trigger and identify if it's certain, trends in EMS call types, for instance, right? That could help you identify potential vulnerable populations and where they're located to inform evacuation planning and other factors. But you would perform those types of analysis in other tools that you might be using, whether you're using other analysis tools, whether you have a GIS unit that is conducting some analysis. The beauty with NERIS, though, is that we're providing you back your data as a service that is fully interoperable and consumable by really any tool that you should be using that is also compatible. So that's the way I would kind of bring those two together. It's a really key data input for that type of use.
Yeah, I think Rebecca, what you touched on is perfect. It kind of goes back on the earlier conversation about teamwork and collaboration. And so what he's asking, the first thing I thought of was a couple third-party applications out there that help sponsor us. So maybe we throw some of those out at a later time, but and invite them onto the show. But you really want to find out, what can those third-party applications do? NERIS has empowered us with our own data. We can share it with those vendors, and there may be some things on the back end where they can speak to each other, and we can really get the answers that we're looking for. But talking about technology and the things that are arriving now, Rebecca, is there anything that you can maybe share about an example of technology that possibly couldn't have existed without NERIS?
Yeah, so one of the things I was really encouraged by was this year, well, I guess in 2024, it was December, we were out for Technology Summit International 2024. And when I scanned the room at all of the different expo booths and all of that, the number of brand new companies launching technology built on the framework of NERIS and essentially marketing themselves accordingly, and then seeing all these other vendors around the room leveraging NERIS, that to me is really exciting. So one of the like kind of background objectives that we've had and how we've approached NERIS development is how can we build NERIS in a way that catalyzes innovation in the technology industry, right? We're not here to replace the tech. We want to catalyze new ideas and capabilities that were maybe a great idea someone has had, but it wasn't possible. How do we build NERIS in such a way that establishes that foundation for that innovation to occur? And when I saw that at TSI, just roughly 5 months ago, I was really amazed at where they had already gone. And that was before we had even actually launched the NERIS Data Exchange Compatibility Program as well. So I wasn't too surprised that when we rolled that out, we started to see more and more vendors coming on board. And, as I look to the future, I was at Metro Chiefs last week, and I heard it was almost like an echo chamber from every vendor that stood up at the podium to talk about what they're doing. It was a case of 9 out of 10 were talking about how they are building and innovating on top of NERIS. And I was like, this is it. Like, we've done the right thing for the fire service to really allow for that future of technology to evolve.
So I have a question, and Tom, you may be able to answer this, and it kind of goes off what you were talking about and getting granular into fire departments and that onboarding process. Several years ago, there was this initiative to do this national mutual aid system across the country that never really came to fruition. And I think that part of it is just because finding out how many fire departments there are and what units they have. Do you think this could be a foundation for something like that again?
Yeah, I think the short answer is yes. Is that the intent today? No. But I don't think that I don't think you'd find anybody involved in the project that would dispute the idea that having a good inventory, right, knowing the location of the closest and most appropriate resource, whether it's a water event, whether it's a wildfire event, that's a big step in the right direction. And one of the complexities of response in this country, and this is true nationally on incidents of national consequence, and it's true in Garland, Texas, is that determining the location of the closest and most appropriate resource, regardless of what the name on the door says or the patch on the uniform says, that's difficult today. And there are just a few, metropolitan areas because of consolidated dispatch and boundaryless AVL-based dispatch, that they've been able to, really overcome it. For the most part, we're all seeing symptoms of it. And so I think that NERIS, without a doubt, will provide that foundation to help us understand how fire departments, deploy, help them solve problems at the local level. And by virtue of our ability to start having that conversation, I think it immediately helps departments in a regional basis, a metro basis, and then even nationally, just help to understand how we deploy and how we can do better.
That's a really exciting unintended consequence or outcome of NERIS, I think.
Yeah, and
It's
I wanted to follow with what Rebecca said. In my new role, I managed a budget, and I never really paid attention about the investment it really takes to send folks off to conferences. And now that I have to watch every single penny, I get it. Now I know I would get those looks when I'd bring another form. Hey, can I go here? Can I go here? But what Rebecca mentioned TSI. I just want to give a shameless plug to the conference. It is worth the investment for any fire chiefs or budget chiefs or vendors out there. It really is worth the investment. When we start talking about the shift in culture, and maybe Scott, you can kind of touch on this. You've been involved in this group, you and Corey, really since the inception. Can you talk about the current culture of data in the fire service and what you've seen change recently?
I think we're becoming more accepting of data, but I still think there's some skepticism of data out there, and I don't think I think that's because of just reporting in general, and people know you can skew data any way you want to, and so there's some skepticism of it out there. But I think it's really important for us to utilize our data to make better decisions. But also too, we have to remember that data is an imperfect snapshot of the past that we hope predicts the future. And a lot of that is because of our collection points. And NFIRS is a great example of collecting bad data. And it wasn't intended. The intent was to collect good data, but it's where a lot of times we're relying on the human being to input the correct data. And my hope is, and you all know better than I do, that NERIS kind of takes some of that human aspect out of it, the human bias, so we can get better data to actually identify our vulnerable areas in our city. For one, like I talked to my firefighters about, using data to help with public education campaigns. So if you find out what are the causes of fires and where's that happening in your city, you can focus that public education campaign on that area of the city that needs that portion. If it's cooking fires, because it's expensive and it's hard, it's logistically difficult to educate your entire city. But if you use that data to focus in on certain areas, you can do a lot better job educating your city and applying that community risk reduction into your department.
Yeah, and so I'm looking at the clock. The show must come to an end soon enough. So I think we got about 15 more minutes, but it's kind of making me think of things that are sunsetting. So Rebecca, let's talk about sunsetting the legacy program. All good things must come to an end eventually. What is that going to look like?
And how big of a party are we going to have for it?
Good question.
Well, it has served us well in the time that we've had, so we will honor and the legacy NFIRS for what it was. But before I answer that question, I also want us to be thinking about like what we could do with NERIS as a capability and as a system into the future. I love the fact that you asked the question about a national mutual aid system. That was actually the challenge that I gave to the Metro chiefs at the end of my presentation last week to them, is what would that look like now that we're going to have a foundation of accurate information on departments, stations, units, staffing levels, and we'll have the ability to share core CAD data in a way we've not been able to before, right? So I'll just plant that seed there because I think that's an interesting future that I really encourage the fire service to bring their heads together and figure out how to solve that wicked challenge. So with regards to NFIRS, that's the Legacy National Fire Incident Reporting System, sunset, we actually just launched a web page on the USFA website. If you navigate under NFIRS, it's the first item. It says NFIRS sunset. And the last day for NFIRS is January 31st, 2026. But let me tell you what that actually means. So that means that your remaining 2025 calendar year incident data will be able to be submitted into that legacy system essentially no later than January 31st, 2026. And then starting January 1st, so that's January 1st, 2026, incident reporting will be exclusively into NERIS. So those are some really important dates to consider because NFIRS as a whole will become unavailable. So we'll be turning the lights off on that legacy system at 11:59 on January 31st, 2026. And I can share with you that we will not be deviating from that schedule. I was reminded today by our Office of Cybersecurity around our decommissioning schedule to ensure we're on target. So that's the pathway. What I will also share with you all on this is that we've received quite a bit of questions around, does a local fire department need to export their data out of the legacy NFIRS system before the deadline? So that the answer to that question is really twofold. So if a local fire department is already storing their incident data in a local system, whether that's their RMS or maybe it's just a hard drive on a computer, maybe it's printed copies sitting in a file drawer, right? Whatever storage they're already doing, as long as they're complying with their local jurisdiction or local department's records retention policy, is what they need to do. But if they don't have copies of their local incident data already stored somewhere outside of that NFIRS, then they are encouraged to export their incident data from the system. And we did actually provide some instructions in a one-page sheet on how to perform that export with some guidance just based on the nuances of that legacy system and how it operates. So, that's the big thing that we would encourage departments, especially, maybe smaller departments that don't have their own records management systems, would be to really review that page and use any of the guidance to do what they need to do. But it is all there. We really want to raise awareness. We want to ensure that the fire service is prepared for this, because once the lights go out on that legacy system, you aren't going to be able to contact us, and we're not going to be able to manually go get your data for you, right? We have to comply with our data retention policies as well. And so, that's a big thing. We are excited about this transition. It's been a long time coming, I think, as many of you all know and share with us. But the only other thing I'd add, and then I'll stop, is the legacy NFIRS public data release. So there is a public data release that's been available. I think we have 43 years of data now available publicly on the Open FEMA site. That is going to continue to be available to you. So that will still be on the Open FEMA site. The public will be able to use that at this stage. That's sort of in perpetuity. And then we have also completed the geocoding for the last 10 years of NFIRS public data. And we will be releasing a geocoded version or fully geospatially compatible version of 10 years of that legacy data. So that's going to increase the accessibility and usability of that historical data as a part of this transition. I know that was long-winded, but I wanted to kind of cover all bases with you. Thanks.
I think the biggest takeaway for anybody listening, if they heard you right, January 3rd, don't call and say my fire chief wants a 5-year report of all the calls we ran. You need to be working on that today, right? We need to move forward and be doing what we need to do, because actually when we end this, I'll be calling our data analyst saying, hey, we should probably pull our data now, right? Early and often. Go ahead, Scott.
Even if you already have an RMS system, go ahead and pull it just in case.
Yeah.
So to be clear, that's 270 days from today.
Just to be clear.
Right.
270.
Just to be clear. So I guess in closing, this has been an exciting topic. Hopefully we answered, some of your questions out there. If we didn't, you should have put them in the chat. Closed mouths don't get fed. We're here to answer questions and provide information. But Tom, where do you see the biggest opportunities over the next 2 to 3 years in innovation, specifically with NERIS? I know we talked about maybe the the master list that we could use for mobilization, but what are some other opportunities you think of?
I came from a department that, we were an ISO 1 accredited department. And what I recall, having participated in and wrote much of the original standard of cover, of course, it's been 15 years ago now, was just how difficult it was to really know much about how my department performed. And it was not the most complex of organizations, right? It was just 9 fire companies. It was just 170, 80 career firefighters. And that's not how it should be. That, we're the most trusted government professionals. We're the most visible civic institution in pretty much every community. We live in an environment where we need to know how we're doing. We need to make sure that we're maximizing our effectiveness in our communities. And so what I think changes with NERIS is that those departments that struggle to understand some basic tenets of performance and deployment, we change that. You all probably come from organizations that use data and analytics today, but you're only able to do that because you've invested a lot of time, effort, and energy into being able to do that. People, you'd mentioned having a full-time analyst. That's something that maybe a fraction of a single percent of fire departments in this country might have that capability. And we want to increase that ability for departments to know what they're doing, and maybe even more fundamentally, we've had to adapt to the legacy system. It's not to say, NFIRS is not the villain here. It sat idle for too long and it grew archaic. And meanwhile, our business changed. We probably all have about the same amount of time, on the job, about a quarter century. And there's a lot different today than there was when we came on, whether we realize it or not. When you really do inventory, that's the case. And we want to have a system that we don't have to adapt to as firefighters and decision makers. We need a system that's adaptable to us. And so when you want to know what's going to change, it's that, this is not a project, right? NERIS is a process in which we will continue to improve it and expand it and modernize it incrementally in the years to come to make sure that, fire professionals like all of us here today, including your listeners, that it's working for us. It's helping to answer our questions without, just an unnecessary amount of Advil being taken. So that's what I see happening for us in this industry.
Well said. We think about, again, we just want to highlight the amount of work, and we want to thank you both, right? Sometimes being the one out in front and taking those tough questions and taking those soft hits, it gets difficult. So we appreciate y'all being out in the front. Now we know there's a big team behind you, but Tom, I don't know how you maintain a schedule. I was joking with Jeff Doolin the other day that you two are the two busiest people in the fire service because you're everywhere. And so we also, I personally want to not only thank you all, but your families too, right? Because they have to be involved, right? They have to be willing to make that commitment to say, hey, listen, this is something for the greater good of humanity, for the greater good of our country and our business that we're in. So, thank you to everybody that's really had a hand in NERIS, behind the scenes and out in front. Scott and Corey, I'll stop yapping now. Hopefully my wife says I did the family a little bit better this time.
No, I can't imagine how many airline miles you've racked up over the past year. I was at a conference and Tom flew in just to do a presentation on NERIS and turned around and was out the door. So you guys are doing an incredible job, and thank you very much for joining us today and taking the time out of your schedules. I see Kevin's on there doing his shameless plug with old little Will Jr.
Baby Sophin over there. That's why we're
Yeah.
really doing all this work, man, for that generation right there. That's what it's about.
William is officially Gen Beta.
There you go.
Gen
Beta.
Gen
Okay.
Beta started this year, and yeah, I was doing a little double dad duty, double working. But this was pretty cool. This is the first time we're on Facebook, LinkedIn, YouTube. We had a collective almost 60 people live across all different channels, and yeah, to just so many quotable moments. And one I liked that you mentioned there, Tom, at the end was NERIS is not a project; it's a process. That's something my mom always tells me with change. It's not a revolution; it's an evolution. And you've constantly heard that phrase in the fire service of, and I know people hate this phrase, and I actually hate it too. 100 years of tradition unimpeded by progress. It's not true at all. It just change. We overestimate what can happen in a year and underestimate what can happen in a decade. And NERIS is proof that it's gonna take a couple more years to this, like to really be like, fully extracting value out of each and every way. But like, at the same time, it's starting to really make a difference today. And then it takes a lot of champions and leaders like yourself, Tom, Rebecca, and I think we'd be remiss without giving a shout out to Dr. Lori Moore. I mean, she was the most selfless, kind of forward fire service leader who was all over the place and every single location possible. And Rebecca and Tom, you're continuing to beat the drum and carry the baton as well as possible and the evolution of everything. And I know I'm grateful. I know my son, who's milk drunk, William Francis, is happy. And yeah, so that's my little final comments, and I'll throw it back to you, Scott, and anyone else for final comments.
Well, speaking of Dr. Lori, she was going to be on the show June 3rd, Tuesday, June 3rd. We'll have Dr. Lori on. And our next show, May 20th, we have Robert Edson and Williams Deputy City Manager Scott Kevin. And we're going to talk about technology kind of from the vendor side of it and from the city manager side of it, as far as when the chief goes to the city management and says, I need this technology, and how to purchase it and justify it. So 2 great shows coming up. So I hope you guys join us then.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you,
Yeah,
guys.
thank you so much. Take care, everyone.
All right. Thank you, guys.